What exactly is triple net? What and triple net
So
leases?
yeah, triple net is the net of the taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance costs. And what that means is the tenant is responsible for all of those expenses. So unlike let's say in an apartment building where you have a tenant that pays the landlord rent, you get one check, and then the landlord pays whatever the pro rata taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs are. On a triple net lease, the tenant pays us rent, and then they will pay the taxes, the insurance, and the maintenance. For us, it mitigates risk because we don't have to worry about when taxes go up or when the insurance goes up, which inevitably happens because it doesn't affect our bottom line because it's not our responsibility. Now, there's a lot more to that. I'm oversimplifying it, but that in general is what a triple net lease is.
Gotcha. Okay. I've also heard of the term absolute triple net, so something to that nature. What is that different? How is it different?
Yeah, there are different degrees of triple net. So you want to make sure you understand what the lease says because ultimately that's what's most important. Absolute triple net implies that there are zero landlord responsibility. So if there's a roof leak, the tenant handles it. If there's a issue with the foundation or a window breaks, the tenant handles it. Versus other types of leases where sometimes those are carved out, where the landlord is responsible for a roof leak, but then there's also, if we're getting into the nitty gritty, sometimes it's a triple net lease. The landlord handles it, but then the landlord gets reimbursed when you reconcile at the end of the year. So there's different types of triple net leases. I'm not an attorney, nor do I pretend to be one on TV, but understanding these different nuances and how a lease is structured is super important.
Yeah. So even though we can't pretend that we're attorneys on TV, but we can do that on Zoom. Just kidding. So what type of properties usually utilize this triple net leases?
Yeah, great question. Think about your neighborhood, right? And you're driving down the street and you see a McDonald's or a Chipotle or a bank or a Walgreens or CVS or really just any of the or the strip center or a grocery or any of that. Those are typically triple net leases. So those are the types of assets, the retail. A lot of people were down on retail because of Amazon. When you drive around, mostly what inside of these triple net commercial real estate projects are tenants who are Amazon resistant or Amazon proof, like a dentist or a dry cleaners, things like that, where the internet isn't going to necessarily affect the viability of that tenant being able to pay rent. So it used to be that you would go shopping at a shopping center, but these days shopping centers are frankly they're mostly like service centers. You go there to get your nails done, or you go to have a meal, things like that. So they're it's just what they're called, it's just the jargon. But those are the types of assets that we like to invest in.
I see. Okay. Why do you think triple net seems to be like this hidden secrets almost, at least to the mass consumer market, right? Uh, why do you think that is so? Like, why is it not more popular than it should be?
That's why I'm starting to do a lot of podcasts because I think that it is an asset class that it's not necessarily hidden or secret. It's been around for decades. But I do think that with the state of how multifamily's been going, and I think it has a little bit more of a complicated thought process to it. It's not just the lease. You also really want to underwrite the credit of the tenant, which is not really a conversation that happens in multifamily. So I think it does take a more in-depth analysis and analytical skills to be able to get into this asset class, but
Mm,
it's definitely not a secret. And I definitely encourage people to learn more about it because you'll find that you can get cash flow consistent on day one and better than most other assets. Debatable, but and what we're finding is that this is where we can get stable, consistent cash flow on day one.
gotcha. What about things like cap rate? Are you able to buy it at a higher cap rate than you would in a multifamily, or how is that in comparison?
Yeah, cap rates are, it depends. We don't buy anything less than an eight cap. So I don't know that you can find many multifamily projects for better than an eight cap. But typically, we're actually closer to a nine or a 10 cap in our triple net cap rate acquisition. It also allows us to what we've done, we'll find creative ways to add value on triple net properties. For example, we recently bought a industrial building that had about 6 months left on the lease when we put the deal under contract. While we were under contract, we approached the tenant with the landlord's permission to extend the lease for an additional 15 years. So that by the time we closed, we signed a document and we were able to close on this property with a brand new 15-year absolute triple net lease, with also, by the way, annual rent bumps. So these are the types of ways that you can turn an 8 cap into a 9 or a 10 cap, like basically immediately by having the know-how to be able to talk to the tenant, to negotiate terms that work for everybody. And these are the types of strategies that we use to add value so that on day one, we know that we have equity and that we're protected on our downside.
Very cool. And I know a lot of people who deal with triple nets deals with national, at least some people I know anyways, deals with national tenants. And then of course there's also triple net for your mom and pop local business owners type tenants as well. Can you share like the pros and cons of those two models?
Yeah, for sure. So our niche is buying tenants where they have at least triple B credit. So it's a high credit tenant with a long-term lease, and we define long-term as more than 5 years, but typically it's more than 10 years. And so we won't look at it unless it fits that criteria. Certainly, you could find some mom and pop credit tenants out there, and you can justify, you'll probably get a higher cap rate, but of course, you're going to have a higher risk profile when there's not credit tied to the tenant. And so it's not to say that we wouldn't do those deals either. We're going to dig into the unit economics of the tenant that occupies the real estate. And what I mean by that is we want to know how many widgets, for example, do they need to sell in order to be able to break even, to be able to pay the rent that they've contractually obligated to, because ultimately we're taking that rent as a landlord to be able to make distributions to our investors, because that's what they're counting on. They're putting up their hard-earned capital because they're looking for passive income and to own little pieces of these triple net assets. And we could talk, and I think your question was about credit of the tenant, but also I think I like to use the word stickiness. How sticky are they? For example, a dentist, it might not be a credit tenant, but a dentist, it'll cost a lot of money, be extremely difficult for them to relocate or shut down. And so if they are a profitable business, the odds of them relocating are pretty slim. And so we find tenants like that who are super sticky, who really can't afford to relocate.
I see. And do you only do existing value add type of projects, or do you also do new construction, new development as well?
We historically we've just been doing existing, but now we are opening up to some development projects, both from, so for example, we're in the midst of developing some Chipotle projects.
Mm.
And so talk about credit tenant, but we're also partnering with some relationships of ours who have development projects and they just don't have the equity. And so we're leveraging our network of investors who like to participate in triple net investments. And so that is also another asset class that, so it's both the existing, that's our historical. And then moving forward, we have a new brand called triplenetequity.com where we're partnering with developers who need equity for the development projects.
Gotcha. Okay. I heard that on a triple net type of assets, especially with the type of tenants that you deal with, the GP LP split is a lot more favorable to the LPs than the GPs because there's less management. Is that correct? What is your typical when you're doing a syndication? What is your typical structure?
Yeah, so it depends answer. Typically, we'll structure our deals.
You, even though you don't play us in the Tony, but your answers just sounds just like in the Tony. Everything is it depends. Just kidding.
Yeah, because it does. But okay, so to answer your question, like the last deal we did an 8 pref and then a 50-50 split after that. So in other words, the investors get the first 8% of all the cash flow, and then whatever's left after that will split between us and them. And so that's just one way to do it, but there really are a lot of different ways to cut the pie, so to speak.
Gotcha. Okay. And then usually what's the IRR that the LPs end up with typically?
The goal is upper teens, lower 20s.
Mm,
But really, what drives us is less what the IRR is, but more about what the cash on cash looks like.
sure.
Our investors are looking for cash flow that will be provided on a monthly basis, basically immediately. And so if we can hit our 8 pref hurdle and provide that right away, then that's really what we're aiming for. An IRR is predicated on some assumption on what you exit for sometime in the future. And that is obviously an important factor, but the ability to predict more than 2 or 3 years out is just really difficult to do. And so I personally just get really skeptical when I see people projecting out even beyond 5, but especially 10 years out. Who the heck knows what's going to happen that far out? And so we're not really investing on that, on those assumptions. So
I
if we can
see.
have the cash flow right away, then that is really ultimately that's one of our main criteria when we're looking to invest.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm curious, especially we're talking about cash flow. How does this compare to, say, self-storage, which usually also have cash flow very early on into the deal, and a lot of time pay out monthly as well? Like, how does the two assets compare to each other?
Yeah, so I've never done any in that investments personally in that asset class. I would say obviously one of the big differences is we underwrite the credit and the unit economics of the tenant, and we're not super concerned about whether or not there is competition. But when you're looking at storage unit facilities, it could be that a new storage unit facility could open up down the street, have
Mm,
better pricing than you, and eat you alive. So those are the types of things that we're not as concerned about. But yeah,
mm.
if you can find deals that are cash flowing right out the gate, like those types of assets, yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of value in that type of asset class.